The cold bite of Montana's autumn wind whipped through the cottonwoods as Zachary Daniels guided his horse along the rocky riverbank, the setting sun painting the landscape in shades of amber and gold that couldn't warm the emptiness in his soul. The year was 1873, and the West was still wild enough that a man could lose himself in its vastness, which was exactly what Zach had been trying to do since the war had ended. 8 years of drifting, taking odd ranch jobs and keeping mostly to himself had earned him little more than a small homestead, a decent horse, and a reputation as a reliable, if somewhat reserved, cowhand. The bridge came into view as he rounded the bend, not much of one, just a simple wooden structure spanning the narrower part of the creek that fed into the main river. He wouldn't have even noticed her if his horse, Samson, hadn't whinnied and shifted nervously beneath him. That's when he saw a flash of fabric beneath the bridge's southern end. Zach dismounted cautiously, one hand resting on the Colt revolver at his hip. He'd heard stories of ambushes set by outlaws using all manner of tricks. But as he approached, the fabric revealed itself to be a tattered dress wrapped around the slumbering form of a woman. She was curled up on her side, a small bundle serving as a makeshift pillow. Her face, though smudged with dirt, held a delicate beauty that struck him immediately. Her brown hair fell in tangled waves around her shoulders, and even in sleep, her expression seemed troubled. Zach hesitated. Folks around these parts tended to mind their own business. Whatever had brought this woman to sleep under a bridge as winter approached wasn't his concern. But something about the vulnerability of her position and the approaching nightfall that would bring freezing temperatures wouldn't let him simply ride away. He cleared his throat loudly, then again with more force when she didn't stir. Finally, he knelt down a respectful distance away and spoke. Madam, you can't stay here. Night's coming." The woman's eyes flew open, eyes so startlingly blue they reminded him of the mountain lakes higher up in the range. For a moment, sheer panic flashed across her features, and she scrambled backward, pressing herself against the stone foundation of the bridge. "Stay back," she warned, her voice hoarse but determined as she fumbled for something in her bundle. Zach raised both hands, showing his palms. "I mean no harm, madam, just concerned is all. Temperature drops mighty fast once the sun sets." She stilled, studying him with wary eyes. She couldn't be much older than 25, Zach guessed, though exhaustion and fear had carved temporary lines into her youthful face. "What do you want?" she asked, still pressed against the stone. "Nothing," Zach said honestly, "but you can't stay here. There's a fire waiting at my place, food too if you're hungry." She laughed then, a brittle sound without humor. "I'm not that desperate, sir." Zach understood her caution. A strange man offering shelter to a lone woman would raise anyone's suspicions. "Name's Zachary Daniels. I work at the Circle M Ranch just north of here. Got my own small place about 2 miles upstream." He gestured vaguely in that direction. "You'd have the cabin to yourself." "I can bed down in the stable." "Why would you do that?" she asked, suspicion evident in her voice. Zach considered his answer carefully. "My ma would rise from her grave and tan my hide if I left a woman to freeze when I could offer shelter." He paused, then added more softly, "Seen enough folks suffer to last a lifetime, madam. Don't need to add another to my conscience." Something in his words seemed to reach her. Her shoulders relaxed slightly, though her eyes remained cautious. "I'm Abigail," she said finally. "Abigail Calloway." "Well, Miss Calloway, my offer stands. Storms brewing from the look of those clouds. You're welcome to whatever hospitality I can provide, no strings attached." Abigail glanced up at the darkening sky, then back at Zach. She seemed to be weighing her options, which, from what Zach could see, were few. "I'll be moving on tomorrow," she said firmly. "Just for the night." Zach nodded, relief washing over him at the thought of not having to ride away, leaving her to the elements. "As you wish." "Can I help you with your things?" "This is all I have," she said, clutching the small bundle to her chest as she rose unsteadily to her feet. Only now could Zach see how thin she was, her dress hanging loosely on her frame. Whatever circumstances had brought her here, they hadn't been kind. "My horse is just up the bank. Can you ride?" she nodded. "I grew up riding." Zach helped her up the embankment, careful not to touch her more than necessary, sensing her unease. Samson eyed the newcomer curiously as Zach helped Abigail into the saddle before swinging up behind her, maintaining as much distance as the arrangement allowed. They rode in silence, the only sounds being Samson's steady hoofbeats and the occasional call of birds settling in for the night. Zach could feel Abigail's tension in how rigidly she held herself, careful not to lean back against him despite the obvious exhaustion that threatened to topple her from the saddle. His small cabin came into view just as the first fat raindrops began to fall. It wasn't much a one-room structure with a lean-to addition that served as his kitchen, but it was solid, with a good roof and a stone fireplace. A small stable stood nearby, and beyond that, a fenced corral and a vegetable garden now mostly harvested for the season. "It's not fancy," Zach said as he helped her down from the horse, "but it's dry and warm." Abigail surveyed the homestead with an unreadable expression. "You live here alone?" "Yes," Zach replied, leading Samson toward the stable. "Just me." She followed him at a distance as he quickly tended to his horse, then led her to the cabin door. Inside, the cabin was simple but tidy. A bed stood against one wall, a table and 2 chairs occupied the center, and a stone fireplace dominated the far wall. A trunk at the foot of the bed and some shelves holding books, tools, and supplies completed the furnishings. Zach immediately busied himself with starting a fire, giving Abigail space to take in her surroundings. "I'll heat some stew," he said once the kindling caught. "Then I'll get my bedroll and head to the stable." "You don't have to," Abigail began, then stopped herself. "Thank you." Zach nodded, understanding her conflicted feelings about accepting charity. He moved to the lean-to kitchen and returned with a pot of yesterday's stew, setting it to heat by the growing fire. "There's water in that pitcher if you'd like to wash up," he said, gesturing to a corner where a basin stood on a small table. "I'll step out and bring in more firewood." When he returned with an armload of split logs, Abigail had removed her threadbare shawl and was using a dampened cloth to wipe the dirt from her face and hands. Without the grime, her features were even more striking: high cheekbones, a delicate nose, and those remarkable blue eyes that now regarded him with less fear but still plenty of caution. "The stew smells good," she said, her voice softer now. "Venison. Got lucky with a buck last week." Zach set the logs by the fireplace and stirred the pot. "Should be ready soon." They ate in relative silence, Abigail taking small, measured bites despite what must have been intense hunger. Zach tried not to watch her too obviously, focusing instead on his own bowl. Only when she had finished and accepted a second helping did he venture a question. "Where are you headed, if you don't mind my asking?" Abigail set her spoon down carefully. "West, California maybe, or Oregon. Long journey to make alone. I don't have much choice." There was finality in her tone that discouraged further questions. Zach respected her privacy. "Well, you're welcome to rest here as long as you need. The offer of the cabin stands. I've slept in worse places than my stable." Abigail studied him, as if trying to decipher some hidden motive in his generosity. "Why are you helping me, Mr. Daniels? Truly?" Zach considered the question, looking into the fire rather than at her. "War showed me the worst people can do to each other. Been trying to balance the scales ever since, I suppose." He glanced up, meeting her gaze. "And it's just Zach." Something passed between them then, a moment of understanding that seemed to ease some of the tension from her shoulders. "I've been running for nearly a month," she admitted quietly. "My husband died last year. His brother decided that meant I belonged to him along with all my husband's property." Her hands tightened around her bowl. "When I refused his advances, he became insistent, said no one would believe me over him. He was right." Zach felt a surge of anger but kept his expression neutral. "The law didn't help," she gave a bitter laugh. "The sheriff is his cousin. I left in the night with what I could carry. Been working my way west ever since, taking odd jobs when I could find them." She set her empty bowl aside. "Last one ended poorly. The farmer's wife decided I was making eyes at her husband." "That why you were hiding under a bridge instead of seeking proper shelter in town?" Abigail nodded. "Word travels. Wasn't sure if she'd sent people looking for me." Rain now pattered steadily against the cabin's roof, punctuating the crackling of the fire. Zach rose and collected their bowls, taking them to the kitchen to give himself a moment to think. When he returned, he carried a worn but clean blanket and a pillow. "Bed's yours," he said simply. "I'll be in the stable if you need anything." "I can't take your bed," Abigail protested. "You're not taking it, I'm offering it." Zach gathered his bedroll from beneath the bed. "Latch on the door works from the inside, you'll be safe here." Abigail's eyes glistened with unshed tears. "I don't know how to repay this kindness." "No repayment needed," Zach said, heading for the door. "Rest well, Miss Calloway." "Abigail," she corrected softly. "Just Abigail." Zach nodded once before stepping out into the rain. The next morning dawned clear and cold. Zach had slept fitfully in the stable, his mind occupied with thoughts of his unexpected guest. As he tended to his morning chores, he wondered if she would indeed be gone when he returned to the cabin. The thought left him with an unexpected heaviness. He was surprised, then, to find smoke rising from his chimney and to smell the unmistakable aroma of coffee as he approached the cabin. He knocked lightly before entering. Abigail stood by the stove, her hair neatly braided and her face freshly washed. She had apparently found a needle and thread as the worst tears in her dress had been mended. "Hope you don't mind," she said, gesturing to the coffee pot. "Seemed the least I could do." "Not at all." Zach removed his hat, suddenly aware of how disheveled he must look after a night in the stable. "I also found some eggs. Your hens were quite productive this morning." Zach couldn't help but smile. They aimed to please. A slightly awkward silence fell between them as Abigail served the simple breakfast. Zach noticed she had already made the bed and tidied the cabin, which looked better than it had in months. "About your travels," Zach said finally as they ate. "Town's got a stagecoach comes through twice a week. Next one's tomorrow." Abigail's face fell slightly. "I don't have enough for the fare." "I wasn't suggesting," Zach stopped himself. "What I mean is, if you're not in a hurry, the Circle M could use some help. Cook's daughter just had a baby, and she's gone to help out for a few weeks." Owner's wife mentioned needing someone to help with meals and such. "Pays fare and includes room and board." Abigail looked up, surprise evident in her expression. "You'd recommend me? You don't even know me." "I know enough," Zach said simply. "Mrs. Mitchell's a good woman. Won't ask too many questions if I vouch for you." Abigail stared into her coffee cup, considering. "It would help to earn some money before continuing west." She looked up. "But I don't want to be a burden on your kindness." "No burden," Zach assured her. "I'm headed to the ranch today anyway. Can introduce you if you're interested." Hope flickered across her features, quickly tempered by caution. "And when they ask how we met, I'll say you're a friend of my cousin's from back east, looking for a fresh start after being widowed." He met her gaze steadily. "No need to share more than that." Gratitude softened her expression. "Thank you, Zach." After breakfast, they rode double again on Samson toward the Circle M Ranch, a substantial property that sprawled across a fertile valley about 5 miles from Zach's cabin. Along the way, Zach pointed out landmarks and shared stories about the area, partly to put Abigail at ease and partly to distract himself from the warmth of her body in front of him. The main house came into view as they crested a small hill, a handsome 2-story structure with a wide front porch and several outbuildings clustered nearby. Beyond the house, cattle grazed in fenced pastures, and ranch hands could be seen moving about their morning duties. Eleanor Mitchell, the owner's wife, was hanging laundry in the side yard when they arrived. A plump, cheerful woman in her 50s with silver-streaked brown hair, she raised a hand in greeting as Zach helped Abigail dismount. "Zachary Daniels, twice in 1 week." "Must be my lucky day," she called, wiping her hands on her apron as she approached. Her gaze shifted curiously to Abigail. "Mrs. Mitchell, this is Abigail Calloway. She's looking for work, and I remembered you mentioning needing help with Martha gone." Eleanor's kind eyes assessed Abigail quickly, noting the mended dress and weary posture. To her credit, she asked no uncomfortable questions. "Can you cook, Miss Calloway?" "Yes, madam, and sew and clean as well." "Well, that's fortunate, as we need all three." Eleanor smiled warmly. "Martha left me with 8 hungry ranch hands and my husband to feed, plus all her other duties. I was about at my wit's end." Relief washed over Abigail's face. "I'm happy to start right away." "Wonderful. Zach, be a dear and show Miss Calloway to Martha's room while I finish this laundry." Then you can go find my husband. He's been asking when you'd be coming back. Zach led Abigail to a small but comfortable room off the kitchen. It was simple but clean, with a narrow bed, a washstand, and a chest of drawers. It's perfect, Abigail said softly, setting her small bundle on the bed. She turned to Zach, her eyes shining with unshed tears. I don't know how to thank you. No need, Zach said, suddenly uncomfortable with her gratitude. Mrs. Mitchell's the one giving you work, but you're the one who found me under that bridge. Abigail stepped closer, her voice lowering. Most men would have either left me there or expected something in return for help. Zach shifted uncomfortably. Like I said, my ma raised me better than that. A small smile touched Abigail's lips. She must have been quite a woman, she was. Zach cleared his throat. I should find Mr. Mitchell. Will I see you again, before you leave, I mean? I work here 3 days a week, helping with the horses mainly. I'll be around. He moved toward the door, strangely reluctant to leave. If you need anything before then, Mrs. Mitchell will help. She's good people. Abigail nodded, and something in her expression made Zach's heart beat a little faster. Thank you, Zach, for everything. He tipped his hat and left, wondering why his chest felt both lighter and heavier at the same time. The next few weeks brought a routine that Zach found increasingly pleasant. His days at the Circle M took on new meaning, knowing Abigail would be there. She had quickly made herself indispensable, impressing Alina with her cooking skills and willingness to work hard. The ranch hands, initially curious about the new cook, soon came to appreciate her hearty meals and quiet efficiency. Zach tried to maintain a respectful distance, but he found himself looking for excuses to be near the main house during mealtimes. Sometimes in the evenings, Abigail would join him on the porch after the dishes were done, and they would talk as the sunset painted the mountains in deepening shades of purple and gold. She spoke little of her past, but shared stories of her childhood in Ohio, of learning to cook from her grandmother, of her dreams to someday have a small house with a garden full of flowers. Zach found himself opening up as well, sharing memories of his family's farm in Pennsylvania, of the war years he usually kept locked away, of his gradual journey westward after losing everyone he loved to disease and conflict. One evening, about a month after Abigail's arrival, Zach found her sitting alone on the porch steps, staring at the stars. Her hair was loose around her shoulders, catching the light from the lantern hanging by the door. Mind some company? He asked, stopping at the bottom of the steps. She smiled, patting the space beside her. I was hoping you'd come by. Zach sat, careful to leave appropriate space between them, though he found himself increasingly aware of her proximity. Mrs. Mitchell mentioned you've been teaching her to make your grandmother's apple dumplings, he said. Abigail laughed softly. She's determined to fatten up everyone on this ranch, says we're all too skinny for her liking. Can't argue with the results. Think I've put on 5 pounds since you started cooking here. Good, you were too thin. Abigail's eyes widened slightly, as if surprised by her own forwardness. Zach felt warmth creep up his neck. How are you finding it here, really? Abigail was quiet for a moment, considering. It's the first place I've felt safe in a very long time. She turned to look at him directly. That's because of you, Zach. I didn't do much. You saw someone in need and helped without wanting anything in return. Do you know how rare that is? Her voice had softened, and in the lantern light, her eyes seemed to hold depths he could get lost in. Just did what anyone would do, he murmured, though they both knew that wasn't true. Mrs. Mitchell asked if I'd consider staying on permanently, Abigail said after a moment, not just until Martha returns. Zach felt his heart quicken. What did you say? I told her I'd think about it. Abigail's fingers twisted nervously in her skirt. I had been so set on going to California, starting completely fresh where no one knew me. But now, Zach prompted when she didn't continue. Abigail met his gaze, something vulnerable and hopeful in her expression. Now I'm wondering if fresh starts can happen where you already are. The air between them seemed to change, charged with possibility. Zach found himself leaning slightly toward her, drawn by something he couldn't name. The moment was broken by the sound of the door opening behind them. Alina stepped out, looking apologetic when she saw their closeness. Oh, I'm sorry to interrupt. Just wanted to let Abigail know I've set out the ingredients for tomorrow's bread. Thank you, Mrs. Mitchell. I'll be right in. Abigail's cheeks had flushed pink. After Alina retreated, an awkward silence fell between them. "I should let you get to your rest," Zach said, rising reluctantly. Abigail stood as well. "Will you be here tomorrow?" "No, got some fencing to repair at my place, but I'll be back day after." She nodded, disappointment briefly crossing her features. "Good night, Zach." "Good night, Abigail." He hesitated, then added softly, "I'm glad you're considering staying." Her smile followed him all the way home. The next day dragged interminably as Zach worked on his fencing, his thoughts continually drifting to Abigail. He found himself wondering what she was doing, if she was thinking of him too, if he had imagined the connection growing between them. By evening, he had made up his mind to ride to town the following day before heading to the ranch. There was something he wanted to get, a small token that had caught his eye in the general store's window weeks ago. The next morning dawned clear and crisp, with the first real hint of winter in the air. Zach completed his chores with unusual efficiency, then saddled Samson for the ride to town. Millsville wasn't much as towns when a single main street with the essential businesses, a small church, and a schoolhouse. The general store sat at the center, its wide porch often serving as a gathering place for locals exchanging news and gossip. As Zach tied Samson to the hitching post, he noticed an unusual number of people clustered on the porch, their expressions grim. Among them stood Sheriff Taylor, a competent lawman who generally kept to himself unless trouble arose. Concern prickling at the back of his neck, Zach approached slowly. The conversation died as he neared, several faces turning to regard him with expressions ranging from curiosity to outright suspicion. "Morning," Zach said cautiously, nodding to the sheriff. Sheriff Taylor straightened, his weathered face giving away nothing. "Daniels. Just the man I was hoping to see. Something wrong. Depends on what you know about that woman working over at the Circle M. The widow." Zach's stomach tightened. "Abigail, what about her?" The sheriff exchanged glances with the others before continuing. "Got a wire yesterday. Seems she's wanted back in Missouri, for theft and possibly worse." "That's ridiculous," Zach said immediately, his voice sharper than intended. "Who's making these claims?" Man named Edward Calloway. Says she's his sister-in-law, stole family heirlooms when she ran off after her husband died. The name confirmed Zach's worst fears. This was the brother-in-law Abigail had fled from, the man who had tried to force himself on her. "Sheriff, I can vouch for Abigail Calloway's character. She's been nothing but hardworking and honest since arriving here." "How well do you really know her, Daniels?" This came from Thomas Weber, the banker, whose pinched expression suggested he'd already made up his mind about Abigail's guilt. "Well enough," Zach replied tersely. Sheriff Taylor sighed. "Look, Zach, I'm not saying she's guilty of anything. But there's a lawman on his way from Missouri to question her, and I need to do my job." "When?" The single word came out as barely more than a growl. "He's expected on tomorrow's stage. I'm riding out to the Circle M this afternoon to let the Mitchells know and to make sure Miss Calloway doesn't take it in her head to leave town." The implication was clear. The sheriff suspected Abigail might flee, which would only reinforce the appearance of guilt. Zach's mind raced. He needed to warn her, to hear her side before the sheriff arrived with his accusations. "I understand you have to do your job, Sheriff, but I'd appreciate the chance to speak with Miss Calloway first, explain the situation." Sheriff Taylor studied him for a long moment. "You sweet on her, Daniels." Heat rose in Zach's face, but he met the sheriff's gaze steadily. "I believe in her innocence. That's all that matters right now." After a tense silence, the sheriff nodded. "I'll give you a couple hours head start. But Zach," his voice lowered so only Zach could hear, "if you're thinking of helping her run, remember that makes you an accessory." "I just want to make sure she's treated fairly," Zach said, already backing toward his horse. 2 hours, the sheriff repeated. "Then I'm coming out there and I expect to find both of you still at the Circle M." Zach nodded curtly, abandoning his original errand as he mounted Samson and urged him into a gallop toward the ranch. His mind whirled during the ride. Could Abigail have stolen from her brother-in-law? It seemed unlikely given what she'd told him about fleeing with only what she could carry, but he realized with a pang that he knew very little of her life before finding her under that bridge. Yet his heart refused to believe she was capable of theft, let alone worse, as the sheriff had hinted. He reached the Circle M in record time, Samson's flanks lathered with the effort. Eleanor was hanging laundry again, her eyebrows rising in surprise as Zach dismounted hastily. "Gracious, Zachary, what's the rush? You look like you've seen a ghost. Need to speak with Abigail. Urgently." Concern crossed Eleanor's kind face. "She's in the kitchen preparing lunch. Is something wrong?" "Just need to talk to her," Zach said, already striding toward the house. He found Abigail kneading dough, flour dusting her hands and forearms. Her face lit up when she saw him, then quickly shifted to concern at his expression. "Zach, what is it? We need to talk, privately." She wiped her hands on her apron, alarm growing in her eyes. "The pantry. No one will disturb us there." The pantry was a small room off the main kitchen, lined with shelves of preserved foods and baking supplies. Zach closed the door behind them, plunging them into relative darkness broken only by the light filtering through a small window high on the wall. "The sheriff received a wire about you," he said without preamble. "From Edward Calloway." All color drained from Abigail's face. "Edward, how did he? He's claiming you stole family heirlooms when you left. A lawman is coming from Missouri to question you, arriving tomorrow." Abigail's hand flew to her mouth, her eyes wide with fear. No, I can't face him or anyone connected to him." "Did you take anything when you left? Anything that could be considered valuable?" She shook her head vehemently. "Only my clothes and a few personal items that were undeniably mine, a locket from my mother, some letters. Everything else I left behind." Her voice dropped to a whisper. "This is how he's trying to get me back, if I'm arrested and taken to Missouri." She didn't need to finish the thought. Zach understood all too well what might happen to her if she fell into her brother-in-law's power again. "Sheriff's giving me a 2-hour head start to talk to you. He'll be here after that, expecting to find you." Abigail's breathing quickened, panic evident in every line of her body. "I have to leave, now, and go where? Alone with winter coming." Zach ran a hand through his hair in frustration. "Running will only make you look guilty." "I don't have a choice. No one will believe my word over Edward's. He's respected in the community, wealthy, connected. I'm just a widow with nothing to my name." "I believe you," Zach said firmly. "The Mitchells will too. They've come to know you these past weeks." Tears welled in Abigail's eyes. "It won't matter. Once that lawman comes, I'll be taken back to Missouri, and then—" She shuddered visibly. Zach reached for her hands, holding them gently in his. "There's another option." Abigail looked up at him, confusion mingling with the fear in her eyes. "Marry me." The words hung between them, as surprising to Zach as they clearly were to Abigail. But even as he said them, he knew they were right. "What?" she whispered. "As your husband, I'd have legal standing to protect you. They couldn't force you to go back without my consent, and Edward Calloway would have no claim on you at all." "Zach, you can't. This is madness. We barely know each other. I know you're kind and hardworking. I know you face your troubles with courage. I know talking with you has become the best part of my days." His voice softened. "I know I've never felt about anyone the way I feel about you." Abigail stared at him, tears spilling onto her cheeks. "You'd tie yourself to me, risk your reputation, your freedom, all to protect me from Edward. Not just to protect you, though I'd do that without hesitation." Zach took a deep breath. "I think I've been falling in love with you since I found you under that bridge." A small sob escaped her. "Oh, Zach, I've tried so hard not to care for you, knowing I'd likely have to leave, but I've failed miserably." Hope bloomed in Zach's chest. "Is that a yes?" "How would we even? Reverend Williams can marry us immediately. He owes me a favor for rebuilding his church steps last spring." Abigail's mind seemed to be racing, weighing options and consequences. "And if I'm still arrested? If they don't recognize our marriage?" "One battle at a time," Zach said firmly. "Will you marry me, Abigail Calloway, not just to solve this problem, but because I want to build a life with you?" She searched his face for a long moment, as if looking for any sign of doubt or ulterior motive. Finding none, she squeezed his hands. "Yes," she whispered. "Yes, I'll marry you, Zachary Daniels." Relief and joy surged through him. He brought her hands to his lips, kissing them gently. "We need to move quickly." They emerged from the pantry to find Eleanor looking concerned. Briefly, Zach explained the situation, watching the older woman's expression shift from shock to protective anger on Abigail's behalf. "Of course you must marry immediately," Eleanor declared when he finished. "Robert will drive you to town in the wagon right now. I'll explain to the sheriff when he arrives." "Thank you," Abigail said, tears threatening again. "For believing me," Eleanor embraced her fiercely. "Anyone who knows you knows you're no thief. Now let's get you cleaned up. You can't get married covered in flour." Within the hour, Abigail had changed into her best dress, still modest, but far better than the tattered one she'd arrived in, thanks to Eleanor's generosity over the past weeks. Her hair was neatly arranged, and Eleanor had insisted she wear a small brooch for something borrowed. Robert Mitchell, a taciturn but fair-minded rancher, drove them to town, his silence conveying his support more effectively than words. As they approached the small white church, Zach felt both terrified and more certain than he'd ever been about anything. Reverend Williams, a kindly older man with a shock of white hair, listened gravely to their situation and agreed to perform the ceremony immediately. His wife was called in as a witness, along with Robert Mitchell. The ceremony itself was brief but meaningful. Standing before the altar, holding Abigail's trembling hands in his, Zach felt as though his life until this moment had been merely preparation for this union. When he slipped his mother's ring, the one possession he'd kept through all his wandering years, onto Abigail's finger, the rightness of it nearly overwhelmed him. "I now pronounce you husband and wife," Reverend Williams said, his voice warm with genuine blessing. "What God has joined together, let no man put asunder." Zach leaned forward and gently pressed his lips to Abigail's, their first kiss, sweet and full of promise. They had just signed the marriage certificate when the church door opened, revealing Sheriff Taylor. His expression registered surprise at finding them there, then understanding as he took in the scene. "I see you found a different solution than I expected, Daniels." Zach stepped slightly in front of Abigail, though he kept her hand firmly in his. "Sheriff, may I present my wife, Mrs. Abigail Daniels." The sheriff removed his hat, nodding to Abigail. "Madam, congratulations to you both." He turned his attention back to Zach. "This doesn't entirely solve the problem, you understand. The Missouri lawman will still want to question her." "As her husband, I'll be present for any questioning," Zach said firmly, "and we'll be happy to address these false accusations directly." The sheriff studied them both for a long moment, then sighed. "For what it's worth, I never much believed those charges. Seemed too convenient, especially with no proof offered beyond this Calloway fellow's word." He replaced his hat. "I'll inform the Missouri lawman when he arrives that Mrs. Daniels is ready to answer his questions, with her husband and legal counsel present if she so chooses." Relief washed through Zach. "Thank you, Sheriff." As the sheriff departed, Abigail turned to Zach, her eyes wide. "Did that really just happen? Are we truly married?" "We are," he confirmed, squeezing her hand. "For better or worse, though I'm hoping mostly for better." A small smile curved her lips. "What do we do now?" "Now," Zach said, his heart lighter than it had been in years despite the challenges still ahead, "I take my wife home." They returned to the circle, only long enough for Abigail to collect her few belongings, and for Eleanor to press upon them a basket of food and a quilt as wedding gifts. By late afternoon, they were riding toward Zach's cabin, their cabin now. The sun was setting as they arrived, painting the modest homestead in golden light. Zach helped Abigail down from the horse, but instead of setting her on her feet, he held her in his arms. "Welcome home, Mrs. Daniels," he said softly, carrying her across the threshold as tradition demanded. Inside, the cabin seemed different somehow, as if already transformed by Abigail's presence. Zach set her gently on her feet, suddenly aware of the intimacy of their situation. They were married, yes, but everything had happened so quickly. "I'll start a fire," he said, giving her space. "It gets cold quickly once the sun sets." Abigail set her bundle on the table, looking around the cabin with new eyes. "Our home," she murmured, as if testing the words. Zach busied himself with the fire, stealing glances at his wife. As she moved around the cabin, touching things gently, familiarizing herself with her new surroundings. The domesticity of the moment struck him deeply, filling a loneliness he'd carried for so long he'd almost forgotten it was there. Once the fire was blazing, he straightened, uncertain what to do next. Abigail had removed her shawl and was arranging her few possessions on a shelf he'd cleared for her. "Are you hungry?" he asked. Eleanor packed quite a feast. Abigail turned to him, her expression unreadable in the firelight. "A little, but first." She crossed the room to stand before him, close enough that he could see the flecks of darker blue in her eyes. "You never really got to kiss your bride properly." Zach's heart hammered in his chest. "Didn't want to presume," he said softly. "Zachary Daniels," she whispered, placing her hands gently on his chest. "You married me today to save me from a fate worse than death. I think you've earned the right to kiss me properly." He needed no further invitation. Gathering her in his arms, Zach lowered his lips to hers, pouring all his feelings into the kiss. What began as gentle exploration quickly deepened as Abigail responded with equal fervor, her arms winding around his neck, her body pressing closer to his. When they finally broke apart, both were breathless. Zach rested his forehead against hers, overwhelmed by the depth of his feelings. "I meant what I said in the church," he murmured. "This isn't just about protecting you. I want a life with you, Abigail, a real marriage." She stroked his cheek tenderly. "I want that too, more than I ever thought possible again." They shared a simple supper by the fire, talking softly of immediate plans. Tomorrow would bring confrontation with the Missouri lawman, but tonight was theirs alone, a brief respite before facing the accusations still hanging over them. After they had eaten, Zach cleared the table while Abigail washed the few dishes. The domestic routine felt so natural. It was hard to believe they hadn't been doing this for years. As the evening deepened, however, a certain tension grew between them, the awareness of night approaching and the decisions that came with it. Zach was determined not to pressure Abigail in any way, despite the legitimacy of their marriage. "I can sleep in the stable again," he offered as she finished wiping the last plate. "Give you time to adjust to everything." Abigail set the plate down carefully, then turned to face him. In the firelight, her expression was both vulnerable and determined. "You saved me today," she said softly, "not just from Edward, but from a life of running and fear." She took a step toward him. "I don't want to spend our wedding night apart." Zach's breath caught in his throat. "Are you sure?" "Everything's happened so fast. Some things in life take time to grow, others." She closed the distance between them, placing her hand over his heart. "Others feel right from the very beginning." He covered her hand with his own. "I want to do right by you, Abigail, in every way." "Then be my husband, Zach. Fully." The sincerity in her eyes left no room for doubt. Zach drew her into his arms, his kiss a promise of the tenderness and passion he intended to show her through the night and all the days to follow. Later, as moonlight streamed through the cabin window, Abigail lay nestled against his side, her breathing deep and even in sleep. Zach watched the play of light across her features, marveling at the twist of fate that had led him to that bridge just over a month ago. Tomorrow would bring its challenges. The Missouri lawman might not be easily convinced of Abigail's innocence, and Edward Calloway seemed unlikely to give up his pursuit easily. But for the first time in years, Zach felt ready to face whatever came because he wouldn't be facing it alone. He brushed a kiss against Abigail's forehead, smiling as she murmured something unintelligible and snuggled closer. Whatever storms lay ahead, they would weather them together. Morning came too soon, sunlight filtering through the cabin windows to find them still entwined. Abigail stirred first, her eyes opening to meet Zach's already watchful gaze. "Good morning, wife," he said softly, still savoring the newness of the word. A smile bloomed across her face. "Good morning, husband." They shared a gentle kiss before reality intruded, reminding them of the day's impending challenge. "The stagecoach usually arrives around noon," Zach said as they dressed. "We should be in town well before then." Abigail nodded, her earlier contentment giving way to apprehension. "What if the lawman doesn't believe me? What if he insists on taking me back to Missouri?" Zach crossed to her, taking her hands firmly in his. "That's not going to happen. You're my wife now, legally and in every other way that matters. He has no authority to force you to go anywhere." His confidence seemed to steady her. "I'm just afraid of what Edward might have told them. He's very persuasive." So are we, and we have truth on our side. They ate a quick breakfast, then saddled Samson for the ride to town. Abigail sat before Zach, his arms around her as he held the reins, her back pressed against his chest. Despite the tension of their mission, Zach couldn't help but appreciate this simple intimacy. Millsville was unusually busy when they arrived. News of the incoming lawman and the story behind his visit had spread through town like wildfire, bringing out the curious and the gossipy alike. Zach helped Abigail dismount in front of the sheriff's office, keenly aware of the many eyes watching them. He kept her hand firmly in his as they entered, a united front against whatever awaited. Sheriff Taylor looked up from his desk, his expression grim. Daniels, Mrs. Daniels, the stagecoach was early today. Marshal Cooper is waiting in the back room. Abigail's hand tightened around Zach's, but her voice was steady when she spoke. We're ready to speak with him. The sheriff led them to a small room used for private discussions and occasional interrogations. A tall, lean man with a weathered face and sharp eyes stood as they entered, his marshal's badge prominently displayed on his chest. Marshal James Cooper, he introduced himself with a curt nod. You must be Mrs. Calloway. Mrs. Daniels, Zach corrected firmly. Abigail is my wife. Something shifted in the marshal's expression, surprise, perhaps, or recalculation. I see. Recent marriage, I take it. Yesterday, Abigail confirmed, her chin lifting slightly. Though Zach and I have known each other for over a month. Marshal Cooper gestured for them to sit at the small table. This complicates matters. I was sent to bring you back to Jefferson County to answer charges of theft brought by your brother-in-law, Edward Calloway. False charges, Abigail said immediately. I took nothing that wasn't rightfully mine when I left my husband's home. Mr. Calloway claims otherwise, says you took family jewelry worth considerable value along with some bonds. Zach leaned forward. What proof does he offer of these claims? The marshal's mouth tightened slightly. Mr. Calloway is a respected businessman in Jefferson County. His word carries weight. And my wife is a respected member of this community, Zach countered. Her word should carry equal weight. Be that as it may, I have a duty to investigate these allegations and, if warranted, return Mrs. He paused, correcting himself, Mrs. Daniels to Missouri for a proper hearing. Abigail took a deep breath. Marshal Cooper, I left my husband's home in the middle of the night because Edward Calloway attempted to force himself on me after my husband's death. He claimed I belonged to him now, along with everything my husband had owned. Shock briefly crossed the marshal's face before his professional mask returned. That's a serious accusation. Yes, it is, and I have no proof beyond my word, just as Edward has no proof beyond his word that I stole anything. Her voice grew stronger. I fled with only my personal belongings and what little money I had saved. I worked my way west, taking whatever honest jobs I could find, until I ended up here. Where she's established herself as honest and hardworking, Zach added. Ask anyone at the Circle M Ranch where she's been employed. Ask Reverend Williams, who married us yesterday after hearing her story. Marshal Cooper studied them both for a long moment. Mrs. Daniels, what exactly did you take when you left? My clothes. A locket that belonged to my mother, letters from my parents and from my husband before we married. A small amount of money that I had earned doing seamstress work. No jewelry beyond your mother's locket, no financial papers or bonds, none. I wouldn't even have known where Edward kept such things. The marshal leaned back, his expression thoughtful. I've known Edward Calloway for many years. He's always presented himself as an upstanding citizen. Many men do, Abigail said quietly. Especially those with money and influence. Something in her tone seemed to resonate with Marshal Cooper. He sighed, rubbing his jaw thoughtfully. The truth is, Mrs. Daniels, I came here expecting to find a desperate runaway, perhaps in hiding. Instead, I find a married woman with community support. He glanced at Zach. Your husband is right. I have no authority to force you back to Missouri against your will, especially now that you're married. Hope flickered in Abigail's eyes. So you're not arresting me. I see no sufficient evidence to warrant arrest. Mr. Calloway's accusations are just that, accusations, without proof. The marshal straightened. However, this matter isn't entirely closed. I'll be reporting what I've learned to the Jefferson County Sheriff. Mr. Calloway could still pursue civil action against you. Let him try, Zach said firmly. We'll face it together if it comes to that. Marshal Cooper rose, signaling the end of their meeting. I'll be staying in town until tomorrow's stagecoach departs. If either of you think of anything else that might be relevant to this matter, you can find me at the hotel. As they left the sheriff's office, Abigail's legs nearly buckled with relief. Zach steadied her, his arm firm around her waist. It's over, she whispered, tears of relief welling in her eyes. For now, Zach cautioned, though he shared her relief. Cooper's right, Edward could still try to pursue this through other means. But he didn't believe Edward's claims. He didn't force me to go back. Zach pressed a kiss to her temple. No one's going to take you anywhere you don't want to go, not while I'm breathing. They walked through town toward where Samson was hitched, aware of the curious stares following them. Word would spread quickly about the outcome of their meeting with the marshal, but Zach found he didn't much care what the townsfolk thought. All that mattered was the woman beside him. What do we do now? Abigail asked as he helped her mount. Zach swung up behind her, his arms encircling her as he took the reins. Now we go home and start our life together, properly. The ride back to their cabin was quiet, both of them processing the emotions of the day. When they arrived, Zach dismounted first, then lifted Abigail down, holding her longer than strictly necessary. I thought I might lose you today, he admitted softly, if Cooper had been less reasonable. Abigail pressed her palm to his cheek, but he wasn't. And you wouldn't have let him take me anyway, Zach smiled ruefully. No, I wouldn't have, though I'm glad it didn't come to that. Marshal Cooper strikes me as a man who wouldn't appreciate being crossed. As Zach tended to Samson, Abigail entered the cabin. By the time he joined her inside, she had removed her shawl and bonnet and was examining the contents of their small kitchen area. I think we need to celebrate tonight, she said, smiling over her shoulder at him. A proper wedding supper, even if it is a day late. The simple domesticity of the moment struck Zach deeply. This was what he had missed all these years of drifting, not just companionship, but the sense of belonging, of home. I have some venison saved, he offered, and there might be potatoes left in the garden that haven't frozen yet. Perfect. And I saw wild onions growing near the creek yesterday. They worked together preparing the meal, moving around each other with an ease that belied their short time together. As Abigail worked at the small stove, Zach found himself watching her, still hardly believing she was really his wife. I can feel you staring, she said without turning around. Can't help it. Still not sure I'm not dreaming. She glanced over her shoulder, her eyes twinkling. If you're dreaming, Mr. Daniels, then I am too, and I'd rather not wake up. The simple supper they prepared tasted better than any fancy meal Zach could remember. Afterward, they sat side by side on the small bench outside the cabin, watching as the first stars appeared in the deepening twilight. When I was a girl, I used to wish on the first star every night, Abigail said softly. I stopped believing in wishes after my husband died. Zach took her hand, interlacing their fingers, and now she leaned her head against his shoulder. Now I'm starting to believe again, in wishes. In second chances, she looked up at him. In love, his heart swelled at her words. I never expected to find you, wasn't even looking, but now I can't imagine my life without you. Is that why you married me? Because you couldn't imagine life without me? That, and because I couldn't bear the thought of you being taken away to face that man alone. He turned to face her fully. I meant what I said yesterday, Abigail. This isn't just about protection. I love you. The wonder in her eyes was humbling. I love you too, Zach. So much it frightens me sometimes. I never thought I'd have this again, a chance at happiness, at a real home. He kissed her then, tenderly at first, then with increasing passion as she responded eagerly. When they finally broke apart, breathless and flushed, the stars had fully emerged in the night sky. Perhaps we should continue this conversation inside, Zach suggested, his voice husky with desire. Abigail smiled, rising and taking his hand. I believe you're right, husband. The night air is getting quite chilly. He followed her inside, closing the door on the world beyond a world that had tried to separate them, but had only succeeded in bringing them closer together. As winter settled over the Montana territory, Zach and Abigail fell into the rhythms of married life with a naturalness that surprised them both. The small cabin, which had seemed perfectly adequate for one, proved somewhat cramped for two, especially as Abigail expanded their household with small touches that made the space truly a home. Zach continued his work at the Circle M 3 days a week, while Abigail divided her time between homemaking and helping Alina Mitchell occasionally when larger meals needed preparation. The arrangement suited them well, providing both income and the time to improve their own homestead. No further word came from Missouri, and as weeks passed with no legal papers or renewed accusations, they began to believe that perhaps Edward Calloway had abandoned his pursuit. Marshall Cooper, true to his word, had departed on the next stagecoach, though not before telling Zach privately that he would be looking into Edward Calloway's business dealings more closely upon his return. A man who would force himself on his dead brother's wife might be capable of other dishonorable actions, the marshal had said meaningfully. December brought heavy snows and the holiday season. Zach surprised Abigail by cutting a small pine tree from the forest edge and bringing it into their cabin, a tradition from his childhood that she enthusiastically embraced. They decorated it with paper ornaments she crafted, and pine cones gathered from the forest floor before the snow had covered everything. On Christmas Eve, they exchanged simple gifts: a new hunting knife for Zach, crafted by the blacksmith in town, and a handmade quilt for Abigail, which Alina had helped Zach commission from the best quilter in the county. As they lay in bed that night, the cabin illuminated only by moonlight reflecting off the snow and the dying embers of the fire, Abigail nestled against Zach's chest, her fingers tracing idle patterns through the light hair there. "I have another gift for you," she whispered. "But it won't arrive for about 7 more months." Zach's hand, which had been stroking her back, stilled. "Abigail, are you saying?" She lifted her head to look into his eyes, her own shining with joy and a hint of nervousness. "I'm with child, Zach. We're going to have a baby." For a moment, he could only stare at her, overwhelmed by the rush of emotions her announcement had triggered. Then, with a sound that was half laugh, half sob, he gathered her close, pressing kisses to her hair, her forehead, her lips. "A baby," he repeated, awe evident in his voice. "Our baby." Abigail's smile was radiant. "Are you happy?" Happy doesn't begin to cover it. He placed his hand gently on her still flat stomach. "When did you know?" "I've suspected for a few weeks. I've been waiting to be certain before telling you." She covered his hand with her own. "It's early yet, not even 3 months along, but Alina confirmed it yesterday when I visited her." Zach felt a momentary pang that Alina had known before him, but it was quickly overwhelmed by sheer joy. "We're going to need a bigger house." Abigail laughed softly. "I've been thinking the same thing. That lean-to kitchen is barely adequate for the two of us, let alone with a little one underfoot. I'll start planning an addition as soon as the snow melts." Zach's mind was already racing with ideas. "Another bedroom, a proper kitchen, maybe even a small parlor." "Our home," Abigail murmured, settling back against his chest. "It still seems like a dream sometimes." Zach tightened his arms around her, marveling at how his life had changed in just a few short months. From solitary cowhand to husband and soon-to-be father. All because he'd happened upon a woman sleeping under a bridge. "If it's a dream," he whispered, "then I never want to wake up." Spring came early that year, the snow melting to reveal tender green shoots pushing through the soil. As promised, Zach began work on expanding their cabin as soon as the ground had thawed enough to dig new foundations. Robert Mitchell and several hands from the Circle M helped with the heavier work, raising walls and setting roof beams in a community effort that touched both Zach and Abigail deeply. By May, the addition was taking shape: a proper bedroom for them, a smaller room for the baby, and an expanded kitchen with real windows that let in the morning light. As Abigail's belly grew round with their child, so too did their hopes for the future. Zach began to consider taking on more responsibilities at the Circle M, with an eye toward eventually becoming foreman. Robert had hinted that such a position might be available in the coming year, as the current foreman was considering retirement. They were discussing this possibility one evening in early June as they sat on their newly expanded porch, enjoying the lingering twilight, when they heard the sound of an approaching horse. Zach tensed slightly, his hand moving instinctively toward the rifle kept just inside the door. Visitors were uncommon, especially at this hour. The rider came into view. Sheriff Taylor, his expression unreadable as he drew his horse to a stop before their porch. "Evening, Sheriff," Zach called, rising to his feet. "Something wrong in town." Sheriff Taylor dismounted, removing his hat as he approached. His gaze briefly took in Abigail's prominent belly before returning to Zach. "Got some news I thought you should hear directly from me rather than through town gossip," he said, his tone serious. "May I sit?" "Of course," Abigail said, concern evident in her voice. "Can I offer you some coffee, Sheriff?" "No, thank you, madam." He settled into the chair Zach offered, then leaned forward, his elbows on his knees. "Had a telegram today from Marshal Cooper back in Missouri. Seems there's been some developments regarding Edward Calloway." Zach felt Abigail tense beside him, her hand seeking his. "What kind of developments?" he asked, his voice steady despite the sudden pounding of his heart. "Calloway's been arrested," the sheriff said bluntly. "Fraud, mostly, though there are other charges pending. Apparently, Marshal Cooper's investigation uncovered quite a web of illegal activities: forged documents, misappropriated funds, land swindles." Relief washed over Zach, followed quickly by concern as he felt Abigail's grip tighten. "What does this mean for us?" she asked softly. "For the accusations against me," Sheriff Taylor's weathered face softened slightly. "That's the other part of the news, Mrs. Daniels. Those charges have been formally withdrawn. Seems Calloway confessed to fabricating the theft story as part of a plea arrangement. You're in the clear, officially and completely." A small sound escaped Abigail, something between a sob and a laugh. Zach put his arm around her shoulders, drawing her close as she pressed a hand to her mouth. "Thank you for bringing this news personally, Sheriff," Zach said, his voice rough with emotion. Sheriff Taylor nodded, rising to his feet. "Figured you deserved to hear it straight. Marshal Cooper also mentioned that if you ever wanted to return to Missouri to claim any property rightfully belonging to you from your first husband's estate, the courts would likely look favorably on such a petition." Abigail shook her head firmly. "There's nothing there I want or need. My life, my home is here now." The sheriff replaced his hat, touching the brim in a small gesture of respect. "That's what I figured you'd say. Well, I'll leave you folks to your evening. Congratulations again on the little one. When's it due?" "Late July," Zach answered, his hand moving protectively to Abigail's shoulder. "Well, you be sure to let Doc Peterson know when the time comes. Man delivers calves and foals all spring, but he gets mighty excited about delivering human babies." With that, the sheriff mounted his horse and rode back toward town, leaving them alone with the news that had finally closed the chapter on Abigail's past. For a long moment after he'd gone, they sat in silence, absorbing the implications of what they'd learned. Finally, Abigail turned to Zach, tears shimmering in her eyes. "It's over," she whispered. "Really over." Zach gathered her into his arms as best he could given her rounded belly. "You're free, Abigail, completely free." She nestled against him, her tears dampening his shirt. "I've been free since the day you found me under that bridge, Zach. Everything since then has just been confirming what my heart already knew, that I was meant to be here, with you." Zachary Elizabeth Daniels was born on a hot July night, arriving with a lusty cry that immediately won her father's heart. Named for both her parents, she had Abigail's blue eyes and a dusting of dark hair that promised to become the same rich brown as her mother's. As Zach held his tiny daughter for the first time, staring down into her perfect face, he was overcome with a love so fierce it nearly brought him to his knees. Beside him, exhausted but radiant, Abigail watched her husband and daughter with eyes full of tears and joy. "She's perfect," Zach whispered, carefully returning the baby to Abigail's arms. "Just like her mother." Abigail smiled, adjusting the blanket around their daughter's tiny form. "She has your chin, and your stubbornness nearly 2 days of labor." Zach chuckled, settling on the edge of the bed and wrapping his arm around them both. "Poor Doc Peterson may never recover. Thought he was going to faint when you started yelling at him." I didn't yell. Much. Abigail's smile turned sheepish. Though I may have questioned his parentage at one point. Their laughter woke the baby, who squirmed and blinked up at them with unfocused eyes. Zach touched her tiny hand with his finger, marveling when her fingers instinctively curled around it. Strong grip, he murmured. She'll be riding her own pony before we know it. Let's get through feeding and changing her first, Abigail suggested with a smile. One milestone at a time. The weeks that followed were a blur of exhaustion and wonder as they adjusted to life with their infant daughter. Zachary, already nicknamed Zara by a leaner, who had appointed herself honorary grandmother, proved to be a generally content baby, though she made her displeasure known loudly when hungry or uncomfortable. Zach found himself in awe of Abigail's natural ease with their daughter, even as he fumbled through his own lessons in fatherhood. His initial terror at holding something so small and fragile gave way to confidence as Abigail patiently taught him how to change, bathe, and comfort their child. By autumn, they had settled into new rhythms as a family. Zach's promotion to assistant foreman at the Circle M brought increased responsibility, but also a much welcome increase in pay. Abigail, though devoted to caring for Zara, had begun taking in sewing work from town, her skilled needlework in high demand among the ladies of Millsville. Their expanded cabin, now truly a home, buzzed with the everyday miracles of family life, Zara's first smile, her first rollover, the way she watched the world with curious eyes that seemed to absorb everything. On the anniversary of the day Zach had found Abigail under the bridge, they bundled Zara warmly and took a family ride to that very spot. The creek flowed peacefully beneath the simple wooden structure, much as it had that fateful day. Hard to believe it's been only a year, Abigail said softly as they stood together at the water's edge, Zara securely nestled in her father's arms. So much has changed. Zach looked from his daughter's sleeping face to his wife's beautiful one, his heart full to bursting with gratitude for the twist of fate that had led him here that autumn day. Everything has changed, he agreed. And yet, standing here with you and Zara, I feel like I've finally found what I've been searching for all my life, even when I didn't know I was looking. Abigail leaned into his side, her arm slipping around his waist. Home, she said simply. Home, Zach echoed, pressing a kiss to her temple. And to think it all started because a cowboy found a woman sleeping under a bridge. Abigail smiled up at him, love shining in her eyes, and said there was a fire waiting at his place. Best words I ever spoke, Zach murmured, holding his family close as the autumn sunlight danced on the water, promising more seasons, more years, more love to come. 10 years later, on a bright spring morning, Zach stood on the porch of what was now a substantial farmhouse, watching as Zara helped her 5-year-old brother, James, mount his first pony. At 10, Zara was already a skilled rider, her confidence and gentle instruction with her little brother making Zach's chest swell with pride. Behind him, the screen door opened and Abigail stepped out, their 2-year-old daughter, Mary, balanced on her hip. They look like they're doing well, she observed, leaning against Zach as they watched their older children. Zara's a natural teacher, Zach said. Gets that from you. Abigail smiled, adjusting Mary's bonnet to shield her from the sun, and her riding ability comes straight from her father. Mary wiggled to be set down, and Abigail carefully placed her on the porch, where she immediately toddled toward her father. Zach scooped her up, delighting in her happy squeal. Pa, watch me. James called from the paddock, where he was now seated proudly atop the gentle pony, Zara holding the lead rope. I'm watching, son, Zach called back. Mind your sister now. As he stood there, surrounded by his family, Zach reflected on the decade that had passed since that fateful autumn day. The Circle M ranch had prospered, and with it, Zach's position. 4 years ago, when Robert Mitchell decided to scale back his involvement, he had offered Zach a partnership in the ranch, an opportunity Zach had seized with both hands. Now, at 42, Zach was a respected rancher in his own right, with a thriving family and deep roots in the community. Abigail, at 37, had grown from the frightened woman under the bridge to a confident mother and skilled businesswoman, her seamstress work having evolved into a small but successful dressmaking shop in town. Their journey hadn't been without challenges. There had been difficult winters, poor harvests, even a brush with a diphtheria outbreak that had nearly claimed James when he was just 2. But through it all, they had faced life's storms together, their love growing deeper and stronger with each passing year. "What are you thinking about?" Abigail asked, noticing his thoughtful expression. Zach smiled down at her, still struck by her beauty after all these years. A few strands of silver now threaded through her brown hair, and the lines around her eyes spoke of both laughter and worries, but to him, she was more beautiful than ever. "Just counting my blessings," he replied, shifting Mary to one arm so he could wrap the other around his wife. "And thinking about how different life might have been if I'd taken another route home that day." Abigail leaned her head against his shoulder. "I've always believed we were meant to find each other, if not under that bridge, then somewhere else somehow." "Is that so?" Zach teased gently. "Getting philosophical in your old age, Mrs. Daniels," she poked him playfully in the ribs. "Watch who you're calling old Mr. Daniels. I'm still young enough to give you a run for your money." Their laughter drew the attention of Zara and James, who waved from the paddock. Mary clapped her tiny hands, delighted by her parents' joy even if she didn't understand its source. As the morning sun climbed higher in the Montana sky, warming the land that had become their home, Zach felt a contentment so deep it seemed to reach into his very soul. From the moment he'd offered shelter to a frightened woman beneath a bridge, his life had been transformed in ways he could never have imagined. "I love you, Abigail Daniels," he said softly, pressing a kiss to her temple. "Today and always." She turned her face up to his, her blue eyes as captivating as they had been that first day. "And I love you, Zachary Daniels, for finding me, for saving me, for building this life with me." As their lips met in a tender kiss, their youngest daughter squirming between them and their older children's laughter floating on the breeze, Zach knew with absolute certainty that this family, this love, this life they had created together was the greatest blessing a man could ever receive. And it had all begun with 7 simple words. "There's a fire waiting at my place."